I can actually speak 7 languages, and 4 of those languages were learned pretty well before I was 6 years old. Let's take a little dive into what it takes for a person to become acquainted with a particular language. Let's take it from the top. I've said previously in some videos that when you're learning a new language, the first thing that you get used to is the sound pattern of that particular language. For instance, when you're learning a language like Chinese, there are certain things there are certain sounds that the Chinese language makes that the English language does not. All of these languages have something basic in common, and that is phonemes. Phonemes is just the sound that you make when you speak. And putting a couple of phonemes together, you get a sound pattern of that particular language. So, in learning a new language, the first thing that a person is going to do is try and siphon through all of the sounds and find out which of the sounds belong to the particular language that you're learning. So, for instance, in learning to speak 4 languages in Ghana, although they were learned at the same time, listening to all the languages together, listening to each and every one for a long duration actually made it easier for me as a child to actually determine which of the languages have which of the sounds. So there are about 150 or more of these phonemes. And every language has a set of them. Some languages have up to 40, languages have more, some have less. So the most recent language that I have learned to speak is Chinese. And in learning to speak Chinese, I have discovered how important the sound pattern in learning a new language actually is. So, for instance, Chinese is obviously different from English. It's different from Spanish. It's different from the Kasa language that is spoken in South Africa. And it's definitely different from the Ga language that is spoken in Ghana. So, for instance, when you're learning to speak English and you say, ah, that's it in English. But in Chinese, there are 4 accented tones that sound is going to make. So you're going to have the ah, 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 ah. That's 4 sounds. So when you're learning to speak Chinese, your ear or you as a person, you're going to have to hear it over and over and find out that, okay, when someone says a word like ma, okay, is this particular word an English word or is it a Chinese word? You know how to speak English already, and it doesn't sound right when you hear it in English. So automatically your mind is going to associate that particular word to Chinese. So doing this repetitively makes it easier for a person to determine which particular language they are learning. That is the first thing that you have to do because if you don't know what sounds that particular language follows, how are you going to know when someone is speaking a particular language to you? When I was learning to speak Chinese fluently, which is the 7th language that I learned, one of the things I did every day is put on the television and turn on the news in Chinese and just listen. And over a period of time, about a month, my ear became used to the sound pattern that the Chinese language makes. And before I did that, when they spoke really fast, I could not understand because my mind or my ear weren't attuned to the Chinese language. But after doing this, even when they speak, even when Chinese is spoken very fast or very slow, now my ears were used to it, so I could pick it up. So one of the complaints that I hear a lot, or one of the issues with the teachers in my school, is that they have done a lot of formal education when it comes to English. You know, they have certificates in English, but when I speak, they find it difficult to understand because they've done a lot of reading and writing, but they haven't done a lot of listening. So their ears are not they are not very used to the sound pattern that English makes. So, for instance, one thing I've noticed is that when I go to class to teach sometimes, and I speak Chinese to the class teachers, sometimes they just stand and wonder what I'm saying, not because they cannot understand, but because their mind is able to identify that this particular sound pattern is Chinese. But then again, their perception is that the guy is supposed to speak English. So it's like, okay, like what is he saying? And then momentarily it's like they are lost in thought. But then eventually they come back and realize that, oh, he's speaking Chinese because this particular sound pattern is Chinese. So I submit to your consideration for today that when a person is learning a new language, the first thing is that They have to get used to the sound pattern of that language. And the earlier they do this, the better it is. So, for instance, when a baby is born and we speak to the baby a lot, we talk to the child a lot, the child begins to pick up on the sounds. The child begins to find out what sound, what sounds from this particular language that they are speaking to me in. And you realize that eventually, when the child begins to speak, the child begins to make sounds that are related to that particular language that you speak to them in. So, for instance, if you're talking to a child for so long speaking English, it's gonna be impossible for the child to be 2 years old and start speaking, making sounds that are Chinese based. So I submit today for your consideration for you to evaluate this particular thing and know that when you are learning a new language, the first thing that you're going to have to get used to is the sound pattern of that language. And the only way to do that is to listen. The only way to do that. I can't prescribe another method. I think the only way to do this is to listen to more of that particular language. Let's talk about this more in another video.